Hello, I am Emily. I'm also known as Emiloid. I run a booktube channel by the same name, and I am also a big fan of Little Women, the novel, and also a great fan of discussing the adaptations as well.
I'm Niina. Hello, everyone. And I am a blogger on YouTube, and I have a channel called Small Umbrella in the Rain. I do gender studies on Little Women and been lately focusing mostly on the male characters.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and also I'm kind of well known for relatively well known relatively for my channel for a review I did on the newest Little Women adaptation,
which was really good review,
to say the least. Openly critical of the film, and Niina reached out to me because we had a lot of the same perspectives on the book and the films. So I'm very honored. I'm really flattered that you asked me, because I had literally found your blog when I was preparing for my video.
So nice, because it was really a big surprise for me how many people reach out after I published it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you just learn new things when people reach out to you like that. They share their views. So it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no, because I had a lot of people reaching out to me and being like, wow, I'm so grateful that you have reflected my views on this film. And it seems like they finally got represented. And I before I knew you, I remember thinking about your blog post and being like, wow, would this person agree with me? Because I really love Professor Bear, and this film did not have Professor Bear.
Yeah.
Pretty much. They didn't have, our Professor Bear in it.
Yeah, where is our Professor Bear?
Yeah, where's this beautiful relationship? Well, today, you wanted to discuss Laurie.
Among other things, yeah.
Yes, among other things. We're going to do one video on this channel, on Niina's channel, and then one video for my channel, where we will be discussing Joe and Professor Bear, but you'll probably find that our discussions will kind of go on different tangents.
Yeah, very likely.
We have a lot of feelings on these film adaptations and about this book. All right, well, how about we start out talking about the Laurie model. So I guess you, by the way, I literally just watched the 2017 series last night.
Oh, you did?
I think I agreed with a lot of what you said about it. I think, I like what they expanded on. But the ending's very rushed. But,
it is. I felt like the writer should have had 4 episodes to do it properly.
Yeah. It's somehow they managed to expand on some things, but somehow the ending was just really rushed. I was so surprised at the end.
Yeah, and it didn't build enough for the 2 couples. That really bothered me.
Yeah, and they didn't even really talk through her whole the whole process for Joe and Professor Bear, and suddenly the school is established.
Yeah,
and, they don't build up to that. It was a bit weird. But you sent me a bunch of articles and blog posts before about the subject, and you clearly have done a very deep dive into his character.
I think my biggest problem with the Laurie presentations in the films is that it never follows the book's narrative. This is something that really reflects the way people read the Little Woman. I find it very problematic, to say the least.
Yeah, no, I remember you said that basically Laurie kind of has to go through a whole growth process in the book, because he's actually, well, I guess we should preface it by saying a lot of the adaptations idealize him.
Yeah.
Which you do say in your blog post, because he's kind of this young, pretty guy who's in love with Joe, and we're supposed to feel bad for him. But then what the adaptations leave out is how immature he really is, and actually how horrible he is sometimes.
One of my blog readers, she wrote a very eye-opening review about Little Woman, how Joe and Laurie, the idea is that they feed to each other's, they actually end up harming each other's on a long run with them. And that is something that people constantly ignore. Yeah,
no, and I think something else was, I think a big example is, remember when Laurie's like, oh, I don't want to go to university. And run away together, you don't have to go to uni. And then Meg's like, no, don't tell
Hello, friends. It is Niina from the Little Woman podcast. Just to let you all know that the Little Woman podcast episode transcripts are now available as books. You can find them as paperbacks and ebooks. They are wonderful reading for all the fans of Louisa May Alcott. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show.
You need to do it. Yeah, and I was, and at that point I was like, wow, these are not good influences on each other at all.
Laurie was that kind of character that he always did what he was told to do. He always is wanting to do what he's told not to do.
Yeah.
And he has this constant inner conflict because of it.
Yeah, that's true. Because I mean, he kind of reminds me a lot of a bit of me in that I don't think he really appreciated a lot of the privilege that he had at the start, because he's just kind of like, oh, I don't want to do it, because he was sort of expected to fit this certain mold in society that he doesn't really, properly appreciate. And he sort of is just a party boy in college. He messes around and everything, and he doesn't really know how to be a productive member of society. He doesn't really understand what that means.
And when Joe gets older, it really starts to bother her that he doesn't take responsibility of himself. She's like a little mother for him. Like, she's always taking care of him. Yeah. And it's quite sad the way Joe feels bad that he has all these privileges that she doesn't have.
Yeah, he kind of represents a lot of the things that that she can't have, but he really takes for granted. I think you might have pointed this out in your blog post, but Joe is very much kind of taking care of him because he's really looking for a mother, right? So he kind of really falls in love with her, or he thinks, really, because he's just kind of looking for this character who's going to nanny him.
Yeah, and people forget that Laurie is an orphan. He doesn't really have a stable parental figure until Joe arrives.
Yeah, and he's always envying that really idyllic view of the March family, like, oh man, like all the sisters and the relationship with Marnie, and Marnie essentially becomes his kind of his second mother in a way. I think you also pointed out, despite having craving this maternal figure in his life, he and Joe like to make fun of very feminine girls. They have really mutually negative reinforcing views on femininity and masculinity as well. I was surprised when I reread the book, and I was like, wow, Laurie was actually, why not to swear on your channel?
Go ahead.
Boy.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, he's a fuckboy, but then he turns around and then talks bad about these girls to Joe, and I'm like, wow, this is exactly the kind of guy I would have tried to avoid back in Laurie. He is quite misogynistic. So I'm wondering what you think. Okay, because you pointed out that Joe is disappointed with Laurie, but I think also Amy is as well, right?
Yeah.
Because I think Amy, even if she doesn't have that same kind of relationship with Laurie, also really steps in and is the one to say, hey, you're really not being a productive person, and you have done. You're really idle. And she taps his hands. Yeah. And she's like, your hands. They've never done a day's work. And I'm wondering if you could talk more about your view on Joe and how Joe is kind of his mother, but isn't able to kind of form that relationship with. But Amy is somehow able to come out, give him the same kind of talk, but then also, but then isn't really his mother, is actually able to be his mother.
There is a theory that Amy already had a crush on Laurie when she was 12. But when I read the book like that, it makes sense. Because there's the scene where Laurie goes to cheer her up when she's staying at Aunt March and all that.
Yes.
And I always liked that chapter.
Yeah.
But when I read A Little Woman last time, what I noticed is that Laurie always behaves a lot better with Amy than he does with Meg or with Joe. With Joe or with Meg, he always has this idea that he's somehow more above them, but doesn't really happen with Amy. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Do you think it's because they are both the younger siblings of Joe and Meg, and they kind of are able to reach some sort of equal footing that way?
They're just very different people. There's that chapter where Laurie forges the letters in the name of Jones, and then he's catfishing Meg. And then Joe is like, she wants Meg and Laurie to get together, keep Laurie in the family. She doesn't really see how harmful that is for Meg's reputation. And Laurie doesn't see any kind of harmful elements in his actions.
He's just kind of making fun, but it really is a very mean joke to play on somebody. And especially when one of them involves his teacher, who he really does not appreciate enough.
Yeah, he really takes Mr. Brooke for granted.
And I think I read in your blog, and it just really resonated with me. He is also quite toxic towards Joe, especially when he wants to be in a relationship with her. When he's saying, "Oh, I'm going to kill myself," over you.
Yeah, there's lots of kind of mental blackmailing, and it's quite hard to read sometimes, even.
Yeah, it is. Because and when I think you quoted somebody who said, Laurie's a nice guy, so-called, because he is one of those nice guys who expects to get what he wants because he's so nice to that person. Yeah.
He doesn't really see Joe as an actual person in that point. He wants to marry her because he's expected to marry someone. That when there is the time period when he's in Vienna and he's trying to compose, it's like he doesn't really care who he is going to marry or who is this romantic woman that he's composing these operas for. Like, it doesn't really matter at that point because he just has this idea that this is what the man's supposed to be like.
I think he writes about how she has this phantom of a woman in his mind, and it's not really vague. He's not really thinking about like Joe's characteristics or anything like that. He just like has this sort of Goethean ideal of a woman, which we know doesn't resemble Joe at all. Like, fit into it at all. Like Joe would.
Is this kind of phantom princess who's waiting for a prince to arrive, like from an opera or ballet? It's really not Joe March. And it's really not Amy either, but when he starts to have more deeper feelings for Amy, this phantom, it starts to look more and more like Amy. It's one of those things that is never adapted in the adaptation.
I'm surprised. Like, you're absolutely correct. No one gives Laurie this arc. Nobody delves into his feelings about the Marsh Girls, and even like I think even people even cut out that kind of toxic behavior that
it's really weird, very odd.
And I'm surprised now. You know how these days we're talking about Twilight is so toxic because Edward is so like stalks Bella and is so possessive, and I'm just like, well, here's like this nice guy who's very toxic towards the person that he wants to be with, and it's no better. So and like it really boggles my mind that even a grown-up reader could go back to this character and be like, oh, like Laurie should have been with Joe, and I don't know if you saw, but I think they're even coming out with a book called Joe and Laurie.
I heard about it. I'm not going to read it. It's going to make me angry. So I know better.
Yeah, I don't want to read it either. If you want to write fan fiction, fine. But, I can't believe people are actually publishing this stuff and trying to push this narrative about them that they should have been together. I really can't believe it.
When it comes to Louisa, the whole premise of Little Woman was to write a book for girls about how to marry someone you can actually live for the rest of your life. Yeah. And she really does this very well when you think about it, because she especially crafted Friedrich's character to fit for Joe. And then he's based on men who Louisa was in love with.
So as we pointed out before, we don't have a lot of Laurie, a full characterization of Laurie in the films. I'm wondering, did you expect the 29th film to do any better with his character?
I read the very early interviews of Greta Gerwig who talk about the way Joe and Laurie have this relationship that is not romantic, and that gave me hope. But then I read the movie guide for the new film, and then she kind of goes back with it. I think she's like a Joe and Laurie shipper, which is why Laurie doesn't have an arc.
I think they were doing okay with Amy and Laurie.
Yeah.
For up until the Europe part, because I think setting up their relationship is pretty good. Like I think I said before in my review, I didn't like how they contrived that with Amy's caning being the setup for that, because I think that's actually a very awful scene that's supposed to ignite. It's supposed to be a scene of righteous anger, and I didn't like that it was supposed to be comical. Yeah, but of course, like I liked that they did some work on establishing their relationship beforehand. Like, I'd be okay with this. And, and in Europe, they have that discussion. I think, Amy gives him a talk, and then Amy also doesn't want to play second fiddle to Joe. I was like, okay, this is fine. But then, you notice that Laurie never has to do any work for Amy.
Yeah,
right?
that's
Because
true.
I always found this a very crucial part of their arc, right? Because Amy even encourages him in the film to be a productive member of society.
Yeah.
But then he never does any of that. That aspect of their story is left hanging and just incomplete. And then it's like Beth's death sped up the relationship instead of him actually putting work in, which really sat like badly with me.
Yeah, that's something that really bothered me in the film, and it kind of reflected Joe's character, because she's not given a character arc either.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
She's not. I said in my review, her arc is flat.
Yeah.
Professor Bear.
Like, if we compare that to the 1994 film, Joe has a full arc there.
Yeah,
that's the way it goes in the book.
Despite Laurie not having much of a characterization, maybe not much more in the 1994 film, I think I liked that they actually acknowledged that he went away to actually better himself.
That's
before
true.
Coming back to Amy.
It doesn't really build up their relationship as much as the 2019 film, but Laurie has some sort of an arc in that movie.
Yeah, I think so. I guess now that we're talking about 1994, I think he doesn't have. I think you said in your blog post, we don't get a sense of his temper and how he would clash with Joe, which is why we don't always buy that they would kill each other.
Yeah, that's the same with all adaptations, really.
That is true.
Yeah, I mean, Louisa makes a very big effort in the book. Like, she describes that Laurie has a temper and that he has these violent outbursts sometimes. And Joe has them as well.
You get the sense that Laurie is very subservient to
Yeah.
Joe, which he kind of is, but he also clashes with her in other ways. But and they never really represent that.
No.
And I think in 1994, Christian Bale is really wonderful, and for the character that they wrote. But I guess a lot of people have accused the film of making that relationship with Amy creepy, which underdeveloped maybe, but I never found it creepy particularly.
I think it's because Amy is like 12 in the first book and Laurie is 16, but it's just 4 years difference and they're not romantically together in that way. But then people also say that Joe and Fredrik are creepy, but Joe is like 24 when they meet. I never saw that creepy. And it was written in the 19th century. Most marriages were marriages with age gaps, and Louis had a thing for older guys.
Yeah, back then it was super common.
Yeah, for most people there was an age gap in the marriages.
Yeah.
Or in relationships in general.
Yeah, because families generally wanted their daughters to marry established gentlemen, right, who already had a living. And generally it would take time for a guy to actually establish his career and stuff, and at that point he would marry somebody. So it's not shocking at all that you would have age gaps like that.
If you think about some of the recent films, for example, the new Emma, in the original Jane Austen's Emma, the Knightley and Emma age difference is 19 years. In the new film, the actor is much younger looking.
Yes.
Yeah, they do that nowadays. Male lead is hired to be like young looking guy, even if they're actually a bit older.
It's funny because in the 2019 film they did that with Professor Bear, right?
Yeah.
Even though they weren't gonna do like the proper arc anyway, but they made him.
But then if I think about Amy and Laurie in the 1994 film, I don't think it's creepy. But if you think about how people could actually avoid that, why can't they actually hire a 16-year-old guy to play Laurie in the first part of the book? But people complain about everything.
If
Doesn't matter who we are going to cast, play Laurie.
In the 2019 film, I felt like they had a bit of the issue with Florence Pugh looking older in all of her scenes, whereas Laurie just looked young in all of his scenes. Age is just that you could not quite buy Amy or Florence Pugh as a child, and you could never buy Timothée Chalamet as an adult. Whatever their real life age is, it just kind of doesn't work in terms of that visual contrast between them.
Yeah.
I mean, people have pointed out to me that Christian Bale was only 20 when he played Laurie, but he's able to transition from being a teenager into an adult. So it's sometimes, even if the real age matches, sometimes that's the thing about casting. You really need these people to pass off. You need a certain person to pass off at different ages. And it's weird because I haven't seen the 1933 film, but I noticed that both the 1949 and 1994 don't pay that much attention to Amy and Laurie's arc. In fact, I think 1949 less so. It's not even there.
No. There's this scene before Laurie goes to propose Joe, and Amy's looking at Laurie like with sad expression on her face. I think that's the only scene with them together. And then there's the end when they end up together. That's their arc in that movie. Yeah. Laurie's proposal is extremely romanticized in the film, and it's really romanticized in the 1933 film and 1994 film. 2019 film did better, but then it completely erased Fredrik's character, so it kind of sucks.
Laurie in the 1949 film, I think, I recall his proposal being pretty angry, and I think that was kind of the only time we could ever really buy into his character
having a temper. It's the same in 1933 film. Laurie has a bit of a temper in it. But after that, it's just really flat.
Yeah.
In the next adaptations.
I watched the proposal scene in the 1933 with Katharine Hepburn, and I think, at least she has that sort of line like, I can't love you like you want. But I don't think Joe in 1949 is probably my least favorite. She never really handles scenes like that with much sensitivity. I don't recall her handling it with, or being very in depth about why she can't go with Laurie. My problems with the 1949 film is that they have no balls to do a lot of things. Like Amy's caning, they kind of come up right against it and then back down from it. Do you remember that? Oh, when she gets her hand beaten for having.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so they have the teacher like almost hit her hand, and then he doesn't. Oh
yeah. I really like Elizabeth Taylor as Amy. But the problem with that movie is that they kind of make her the joke, and I don't like that because that's not something that the book does. So it kind of makes this Amy against Joe position again there, because it shouldn't be there. It romanticizes Laurie the same way as it does with Mr. Bear's character, so it becomes this Laurie versus Fritz, and then Amy versus Joe, and it's just not the way the book goes. Yeah, because the book makes very clear that Amy is really perfect for Laurie and Fritz perfect for Joe. Yeah. I still haven't seen an adaptation that does it the way the book does.
Yeah, that's true. I think they did Professor Bear pretty well in the 1949.
Yeah, they actually beat up that relationship pretty well.
Yeah, I appreciated.
He's Italian, but I'm going to overlook that.
Yeah, we should probably save this for the professor video. But yeah, no, I liked that I like it when adaptations develop that relationship. I guess some people will argue and say, oh, well, you can't really develop some of these scenes because of runtime, right? Because there's no, there isn't really, time to do these things. But I feel like there's not really an excuse sometimes when you try and leave arcs, like when you kind of have really incomplete arcs for everybody. It's kind of like how the 2019 film tried to do sort of this Meg arc, dealing with poverty in her marriage, but then they just kind of slapped on a happy ending for that, and then they're just like, we're not going to explore it. We're not gonna have like any sort of
it was left half developed.
Yeah.
But I think that happens a lot with Meg's character.
In the beginning, I mean, I liked that they were trying to do something with her.
Yeah.
But, they ended up not really properly dealing with her in a way that I would like, because first of all, Emma Watson, as we've discussed, can't carry off that kind of, quiet strength that Meg has. When you bring in something like a marital issue like that, like a serious marital issue, I don't think you should just be like, oh, I'm just going to sell it, this silk, and that's it. You didn't make the issue go away.
There was a version of the script, one of the older version, where her meltdown was included, but then it wasn't added into the movie, and I heard that was because of Emma Watson's performance, and that James Norton had to carry out many of the scenes. It goes back to the casting, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've discussed this before, but I think, the casting of Emma Watson is very much based on her accomplishments outside of acting, rather than
very true.
Her actual acting accomplishments, because she plays the same character in every film that she's in. I do admire her as an activist, but I have not been impressed with her since Harry Potter. Having recently watched the 2017 film, not film, miniseries, did you think they did any better with the Laurie arc, or no? Because I don't think he really put in much work either, but what did you think?
I think he was very idealized in that version, once again. He's a very melancholic character there. Laurie, the books, he can be very uplifting and very funny sometimes.
I guess in his interactions with Amy, they were able to build up that relationship a bit more. They acknowledged the musical side of it.
Yeah, that was nice.
Which is an improvement. I think they tried to get in some of his clashes with Jo, when their characters kind of go head to head sometimes. I think they do a bit of that, but when he meets up with Amy, it's kind of like their relationship comes together. They come together, but we don't see Amy, getting him to put his life in order. Because I feel, again, that is such an important part of their story, right? That Amy is the one who can get him to be a productive person.
Yeah, Amy's portrayal in the series, it's really a villainization. It was once again putting Amy against Jo. For once, they adapted my favorite chapter, which calls. Amy, she gets to go to Europe, and Jo doesn't get to go to Europe, because Jo is actually really rude towards Aunt March. Yeah,
absolutely.
And in that particular version, it was framed so that we should admire Jo for being rude to Aunt March. And Jo is like a feminist hero because of that. And then Amy, actually, she's quite happy that Jo doesn't get to go. But then in the book, it's the opposite. Amy's really horrified by Jo's actions, and she feels ashamed by it. It's not something that she's secretly glad about. And then when she finds out that she's chosen and Jo is not chosen, she's really, really sad for Jo. She really feels bad for her. I think 2019 film had that part done much better.
So with the Jo and Amy rivalry, the problems I had with the 2017, I had similar issues with 2019, where I felt like Amy and Jo were somehow in competition over Laurie, which I don't like that dynamic.
And that doesn't happen in the book, because Jo never wants to be with Laurie romantically. She's very clear about it since the beginning.
Yeah, the only reason she would ever consider accepting Laurie is if Laurie accepted her again, and just because she was lonely. That was literally the only reason. I think in 2017, when I saw Jo was just she's engaged to Laurie, what? And I was like, no, you're not gonna. They're not supposed to be in competition over this guy. It's not. Not how it works.
It really has to do a lot with the script writer and how they feel about the characters, because I read an interview from Heidi Thomas, who wrote that show, and she was not a big fan of Amy. So you can really see how that reflects in the film. Jo doesn't really have an arc, and Amy doesn't really have an arc. It's all just a mess.
No, I did feel some of the weaknesses in the writing. I don't know if it's the issue with that actress who plays Jo, but sometimes she can't always pass off Jo's lines in a believable way.
Yeah.
I liked other aspects of that series. I mean, the Civil War, they included a lot of elements of that, which I appreciated. And there's a lot more of Marmee and their father.
Yeah, that was something that I really liked about it. And they developed the characters a bit more. And it was a new take, so it was refreshing.
Yeah, no, because I think I'm always a fan of a strong Marmee, because Marmee has to deal with so much, right? She has to mother the four girls. She's kind of a secondary mother to Laurie. She has to, and she actually has to give him a dressing down at some point. And she has to run a household that's kind of financially struggling. So, you need a very substantial Marmee.
Yeah.
And I love what they did with her in that miniseries. That's an issue I had with the 2019 film. Like, he's so overly happy about everything.
Yeah, it was a bit strange. And they didn't really put that much effort to show the struggles that they were going on.
Yeah.
Like the opening of the film, I think it was a quote from Louisa, I write happy stories because of my tragic life or something like that. You don't really see any of that tragic life in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something that bothered me. Because see that in Little Woman in the book itself.
Yeah, the whole point of Little Women was people getting over their struggles to find the happiness despite the unhappiness, right? That's why I don't like the framing device of the 2019 film. Like, the childhood was so simple and warm and happy, and now this dark times and adulthood is so complicated. I'm just like, no, it was never that happy even when they were kids. They were poor, and they had to struggle for, they had to work really hard from a young age. It was not that simple. It's very pessimistic too, because the whole point is that you're supposed to build up into adulthood, and find your happiness there as well. So that thematic bent on it, I did not agree with at all.
And when it comes to Amy's character and her relationship with Laurie, the dilemma against Amy's character is that some people say she's really vain or she marries for money. But then if you actually read the book, she says that she wants to marry this, what's the name of the rich guy she was dating? Fred Vaughn, because she wants to provide a good life for her family. So she's basically thinking it's some kind of a sacrifice that she must make, that she's not going to marry for love, but marry convenience.
I know, because it's something, I don't think she loves the idea of marrying for money. It's just she always has her family in mind. I mean, I think the book burning incident, I think, sets a lot of people against Amy. And I think that incident always makes Amy seem like an anti-Joe in a way. But but she's also a kid at that point.
Yeah.
And later on, we're supposed to see her become this really mature person, and eventually is able to set the guy she marries straight, and eventually she does marry for love, even if it works out really well for her. Yeah, she's an incredibly mature character. She has a sense of social graces. She's actually really she actually really cares about Joe.
Yes, she does.
Yeah. And the 2019 film really keeps setting up Amy and Joe, even in terms of their artistic pursuits. You notice that? Like, being like, I'm always in the shadow of Joe. Implying that even artistically, she's always in competition with her.
If you read the first part of Little Woman, before the whole book burning accident, Joe is really making fun of Amy constantly, and she's bullying her. There's this whole episode how she's being mean big sister. It's pretty normal when it comes to siblings, that you fight with them, especially when you're younger. And they both have high tempers. But it's when Amy wants to become a lady, she starts to work on her flaws. She starts to control herself. Like, she sees that she can be better. And then the whole promise of Little Woman is that all the sisters, they want to improve themselves somehow. Like with Joe, her biggest issue is her anger, and she's very aware of that. Yeah. And Amy thinks that it's her vanity that is the problem. If you actually read the book, she's not really a vain person. It's like it's in her head. That's the whole idea.
The vanity is more about her desire to fit in with certain circles of society.
Yeah, they are a very poor family. And then Meg has the same problem, that she wants to fit to the society, the word of the young girls. Then she thinks it's pain for her wanting to do that because she comes from a different social class.
Yeah.
But the Marches, they used to be part of a higher social class. and then they fall down. Then Meg is the one who still remembers what it was like.
It really hits harder for her because she remembers the days when her family was still
Yeah.
living comfortably.
It's not wrong for her wanting to be that again, but she kind of makes it a big deal for herself, and that's quite sad. But I think it also has a lot to do with the 19th century Christian morals and all that. So we can't really fully understand that because we live in 2020.
Yeah. It's hard for us now to really identify with that really Christian perspective that the novel really has. Because I when I read it this time around, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of Christianity in this book. They structured their entire lives around these ideals. Of course, I can understand why they would, try and tone it down in adaptations, but I'm not really a fan of how they totally washed that out, because that played such a big part in how they viewed their labor in life.
Yeah, and it also explains a lot of the things that people struggle nowadays to understand in Little Woman. I think it would be important to talk about it more.
I think so. I think that the Christianity, transcendentalism aspect of the story is very important. And I like that the 1994 film actually acknowledged that intellectual circle that they were
That's one of my favorite things about that film.
They've got a lot of nice historical context in that film, and the philosophical discussion. I love it. But definitely Christianity is such a huge thing, and why Little Women is also such a fundamentally American novel is that ideal of you work hard and then things can be okay.
Yeah, that's a very important part of American literature in general.
You can really understand, our current ideals about, personal responsibility, personal improvement, and when you really delve into this book. And, it plays out with all of the characters, about being able to grow up and become productive and give back. Like, I think, people are always so upset about Jo not becoming, a famous writer. It's like, well, she finds joy in being productive.
Yeah. And she does become a famous writer, but people just don't read the sequels.
Yeah.
She's really famous in Jo's Boys. She's so famous, she's really annoyed by her fame. When do we get Jo's Boys adapted?
Yeah. No, I confess to not reading Jo's Boys, but I have read summaries of those books. And I'm and people are like, oh, she doesn't become famous. I'm like, she does become famous.
It took Louisa a long time to become famous writer. It's the same with Jo. It doesn't happen in one night. It takes work.
Yeah, it does. Art is work. But Jo had to, she had to go through a lot of, failures and creative failures in order to get to that.
Yeah.
Art is hard. Yeah, no, that's very true. I feel like we're veering more into the Jo discussion now.
Okay, back to Laurie.
Yeah.
In the book, when he's in Vienna, he really goes through that process of self-discovery and self-growth and self-understanding. I have this thing when I read Little Woman, I always get really frustrated by Laurie because I don't understand his character, his actions, and it's not until there's that chapter when he's in Vienna I start to understand who he actually is. It's really interesting, and it happens after Amy's lecture. She's the first one he actually listens, and I think the difference between Amy and Jo is that Laurie took Jo for granted. He doesn't take Amy for granted. I don't think Laurie was even in love with Jo. He was in love with the idea of being in love. He was afraid to grow as a person, so he's clinging on to Jo so that he doesn't need to grow and he doesn't need to take responsibility of his life. Amy actually tells Laurie the truth. This is the way it is and you need to do something about it. In a way, Amy's character, it's similar to Fredrik in that sense. Fredrik tells Jo the truth. This is the way it is. You can improve yourself or you can stay at the same level you have been. This is what is missing in the adaptations, that whole sequence of Laurie in Vienna and the way he actually decides to be useful for the society. Do a favor for himself. And he's 24 at that point or something. He's been living this bubble most of his life. This very privileged young aristocrat life. I just love that scene where Amy and Laurie are, rowing the boat together, and that has never been adapted either.
I feel like it's so important to his story because I think, lots of young people could probably identify identify with now, because I think a lot of people come from that kind of privileged circle and they kind of have these dreams that probably maybe a lot of aristocrats have.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to be an artist, you know? I'm just going to be like, this kind of have this bohemian life. And then it's like, oh, well, I didn't really contribute anything. These are all just fantasy, and I'm actually just going to get to work now. It's funny in our culture, because I don't know if I'm wrong, but I feel like a lot of us really want that idea of like, oh no, be an artist, follow your dreams. For some people, it's really talk, and what they really need to do is just get a job.
He doesn't really know even how to be an artist, because he hasn't really done that, that working process that it takes to get into that level that he wants to be.
He hasn't worked on his art the same way even Joe has.
Yeah.
Because Joe gets that it's work.
It's the same with Amy when she comes to the realization that she's not going to be a great artist. She continues doing art, but then at the same time she combines that with her other passions like charity work and supporting young artists. She just finds a different way to approach her passions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw a recent YouTuber who reviewed the new film was like, oh, I didn't like that in the book, but everyone's just is just married, and I'm like, well, no, married.
What a misunderstanding.
I'm like, not married at the exclusion of everything else. I mean, sometimes it's just a reality for people. Sometimes they can't make it, and so sometimes they need to channel their passions in different ways. That's a reality of life, and that's what Louisa May Alcott understood.
That's what I like about Little Women, is that you can have it all. You can have the good career, and you can have a relationship with the person that respects you. It's just a win-win situation, really.
I cannot for the life of me understand why people find that unsatisfactory. It's even a promise for people who don't even feel like they could find someone that they could marry. It's like, well, even if you feel that you couldn't be with anyone, then you could find somebody. It's something that I don't think the 2019 film really understood. I think they really wanted to push that whole independent woman narrative, and I just really don't like what that film seems to misunderstand about that book. They at least did a nice job with Amy and her speech about marriage being an economic proposition. I think that's a pretty good scene, actually. It's a scene I didn't hate.
Yeah, and in the 19th century it was an economical proposition. It was really interesting when I did my research on Louisa, and especially on Frederick's character, was that she was part of the movement where it became more important that love and romance was part of marriage and not just money. That is something that Louisa is promoting in all of her novels. I think that's something that they're not aware these days. We don't like to bother ourselves with the historical facts about the authors, but there's lots of misunderstandings about Louisa as a person that are reflected in the way we read Little Woman. It's been really interesting to do research about her.
She is a real feminist in a lot of ways, and I think people have these really contradictory ideas about her, and I don't know if it's because Little Women has been around so long that our interpretations are kind of changeable in a lot of ways, because we're like, oh, she was a feminist. I think they kind of understand that, but then they're like, oh no, but we like Louisa would have been on board with these other notions now. It's like she didn't really want marriage. She was forced into it, or she forced her characters into it. They want to force Little Women to kind of conform to their own modern narrative when you really cannot do that. That's the problem with your adaptation if you do that.
This idea of Louisa being forced to marry her characters, it's really the opposite. She puts a lot of work on explaining why these marriages work and why it should be this way. Those relationships, because it's not really about romance or marriage, it's about build up, how to get there. And these character arcs, they are really beautifully crafted in the book. And the way these characters, how they...
they
complement each other.
Really well. Yeah.
And it's really the same in all of her novels. I've been reading quite many of Louisa's novels recently. I'm always really surprised how she does that. It's something that she's really into.
Joe's story ultimately really doesn't work. I mean, none of them really work essentially without their partnerships. Not because they're nothing without their partnerships, but because, being able to share a life with somebody, I think she saw as being able to achieve harmony in your life, being able to kind of form your own your own circle, your own family.
And in many ways that fits with the transcendentalist idea of romance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's this quote from Louisa, well, not quote, but something that she had highlighted in one of her favorite books, how the character evolves. Like, she's very fond of this idea that the person transcends to another person.
Also a very Christian idea.
Yeah.
You form a union with the person that you marry. It's not that you are not your own person, it's just that you build something better with another person that is like bigger than both of you.
I think that was something that was very radical idea in the 19th century. And nowadays we take that for granted.
It's a real shame that so much of Little Women, I think it has been warped over time by our modernizing world. Like I said before, we seem to have the desire to pull Little Women into our modern world and our modern ideals, when really we're just distorting the work.
It makes it difficult to understand Little Women if we don't know the historical context of it.
That's very true. I mean, that's why I really admire adaptations that try to put the story in its historical context, because I think that context is everything. And I mean, I think you might have heard me criticize the costuming in the new film, for instance, and they're like, oh, well, we're trying to make it like sort of pseudo-modern, and we're trying to make it relatable, and we're trying to do this and that to make it more relatable for the audience. And I'm just like, well, are you saying that without that you need to strip away that context in order to make it relatable? Are you saying we can't relate to like the Civil War, like or anything in that era? Like, is that what you're saying? Are you? And that seems very condescending.
Yeah, and it takes away from the story itself when we are being distracted by the modernism in a way, or postmodernism in this case, or the postmodern ideas, which are not part of the story itself.
I think we touched a bit already on Amy's rivalry with Joe. So you felt that they had kind of a villainization of Amy in the 2017 show. So they kind of expanded on her character a bit more in 2019. How do you feel about how they expanded on Amy's character and that rivalry? I think because I think they really leaned into it, because remember when Joe was flashing back to Amy falling in the lake and she burned the book, and she's just like, oh, well, Amy finds a way to just like get out of like easy situations, get out of hard situations, and which it took me aback, because it was just like, no, she just had, she was called onto a thing with Aunt Marge. She was traveling with Aunt Marge, and in that other situation, I'd say, she was very ashamed of what she did.
Yeah, she did.
And she almost died. So I'm like, I don't understand where you're coming from when you say she gets out of situations like scot-free.
That's really weird way to look at Amy. In the book, she feels humiliation. She really regrets of the things that she does. Joe also regrets the things that she has said to Amy. Joe also regrets some of her behavior patterns. I think that 2019 film did okay. In that sense, it showed that Joe and Amy were sides of the same coin. They're very similar, and when they realize that they're actually very similar, they become much closer. That's an improvement when it comes to Joe and Amy and understanding their relationship. One of the biggest problems in the adaptation is really idolizing Joe a lot. And not really seeing her as a full character, really as a human being. Actually does regret sometimes the things that she says and things that she does.
She's very flawed.
Yeah, like she's very aware that she's flawed. We live in this culture where we are supposed to idealize people who are adamant and don't want to change, or are like rude or aggressive. That's just not the way Little Woman is written to be. Jo sees that her actions are harming other people, and that's one of the reasons why she doesn't want to be with Laurie or hang out with him in the second part, because she sees that they are feeding each other with these toxic ideas.
I don't know how much young adult fiction you read, but I think a lot of it's a common trend that you have as female protagonists. I mean, you even see that in Star Wars, right? Where you have like this female character who could do no wrong, is very spunky and very can mouth off, and we're supposed to admire that. And I think our culture has become a bit averse to what we were trying to get at in Little Women, which is that, Jo is supposed to soften out. She's trying to not harm people with her behavior, and it's a good thing for her because she becomes a more compassionate person. Like, that's what becoming more tender means. That's what how her father puts it. She's supposed to become a more tender person because she is just a more compassionate individual.
Yeah.
And that's also what happens with Amy as well. She also wants to be a productive person. And she also gets to understand that all these things you get in life, you have to work for them as well.
Amy is very compassionate. And she's a very kind person. I really like that in the books. She cares about other people.
You notice, like, even when Fred Vaughn asked her to marry him, she's like, "Oh, well, it's not fair to either of us." She has herself and this other guy in mind, and she knows it's not. It wouldn't be kind to either of them. I really respect her character a lot.
And I think Amy was really the one in the family who really loved Aunt March, and they really ruined Aunt March for me, the 2019 adaptation, because she was way too kind in it. It's really Amy who actually makes her a bit softer in the book. Meryl Streep is great, don't get me wrong, but Aunt March is a tough person to get along with.
Yeah, she's a very tough lady. A very crusty lady. Because she's lived alone for a while. Her kid died, her husband died. She's gotten a little bit bitter over the years. You can't really blame her. And I think, and Jo was just like, "Oh, I'm so done with this gig, and then reading to this lady." And then I think, Amy is the only one who's really able to properly connect to Aunt March. Aunt March, in her heart, she loves these girls. She loves them all.
She loves her nephew as well, but she's just not impressed by his way of being.
Because sometimes when she's just like, "Oh, you made these just really awful decisions," like, I can't believe it. Like, and sometimes I feel that way about other people in my life. It's just like, "Oh, I can't believe you did this in your life. What are you doing?"
She's quite relatable in the end.
Yeah, she is really relatable. I mean, is that what adulthood is? Like, eventually relating to Aunt March.
The part of her losing her child, I didn't realize that until last time I read the book. Somehow it had slipped off. I had a talk about it in Louisa May Alcott group in Facebook with some people, and we were all like thinking, what was the backstory of Aunt March and this child and her husband? That would make a really interesting story for someone to write. It seems that they had a very loving relationship based on the book. It must have made her bitter to lose it.
I mean, somebody write the Aunt March book. She's the sort of person, like, you need to come to her level, and when you do, then you can act. She'll be nice to you. She will do things for you. Only Amy is really capable of doing that. She doesn't even take Aunt March's belongings for granted. Like, Aunt March gives her like a turquoise ring, and she's like, "Oh no, I'm not going to always wear it because it wasn't just for the material possessions that I worked hard." I think they wasted Meryl Streep in the 2019 film. They did not do enough with her at all. Yeah, because I think her job was to be like, well, as a woman, you're supposed to marry well, and then that was it. That was the character. There's a lot more dimensionality to her, which I like it. I like it when other adaptations add that on.
I love her in the 1994 film. Like, she's one of my favorite characters. Very much like in the book.
Yeah, you have to have that kind of element of toughness, but also that element of that kind of nuance of kindness as well. And I love Angela Lansbury as her in the 2017.
She was very good,
Yeah, she's very good.
And I like the way that version developed her relationship with Jo. Yeah.
That final scene between the two of them.
It didn't really do that well with Amy and Aunt March, because it didn't really do that well with Amy, but there's always something that seems to be missing.
Yeah, it's so hard to adapt. It's so hard to get these.
Like, there are elements that I like in all adaptations, and there are things that I don't like in all the adaptations.
Yeah, that's true. Like, even, like, I'm so critical of 2019, and, like, there are things I like in it. Like, people comment on my video, they're just like, "Oh, why did you say this? Why did you say that?" I'm like, well, I did like this aspect of the film, just like I didn't like these 10 other things.
You're talking about a book that was written 150 years ago. We are allowed to be critical about the adaptations, and we are allowed to talk about the things that are missing there, like Laurie's are.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah. Things don't move forward if we don't talk about these things and the way we approach the book.
Yeah, I think we should have these discussions. I think to an extent a lot of people were a bit too afraid to talk about the flaws of the 2019 film, because I got that sense from a lot of my commenters being like, oh, well, I didn't like this film that much, but I couldn't really validate why I didn't like it until I saw your video. And like so many people were so up in arms against you when I criticized it, and I'm just like, well, like, if you're really that upset with me, then go find these other people to talk to. Like, I mean, I even appreciate it when people like talk about some aspects of the 1994 film that don't work as well, which I also acknowledge. You know, there's some things that, you know, you're adapting a 500 plus page book, you're not going to get everything. Like, I get that the Laurie Amy relationship isn't that developed, and I would have liked it if Meg had more screen time after she got married. I do appreciate those things.
Laurie's connected to all of this.
You know, he's a side character, but he plays different roles for different people.
When I started doing my research on Laurie's character specifically, I began to understand him better when I started to pay more attention to the way he has this emotional turmoil, because when I was younger I used to be very much the same. I wish that we would see that more in the adaptations, because that's the part that is always missing and people misunderstand it because they see it as something romantic. We don't see Laurie's struggles. He's really a creep sometimes. If we would see that, we wouldn't have Team Bear, Team Laurie debate, especially if you are hardcore Team Bear like you and I are. So and then if you really like Amy as well, and then you actually have read the book many, many, many times, it just puzzles my mind how people can misunderstand the book so horribly.
No, because I feel like even fans of the book who have also read it many times still have this view on Laurie and these characters, and which like really still feels like such a surface level interpretation of the book.
Feels like they haven't really paid that much attention to what they have read. That's all in the book, and they don't seem to understand it. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do an in-depth study on Laurie and Friedrich as well. It really surprised me that it was really difficult to find any kind of unbiased views on Laurie that weren't about Joe or Amy, but about Laurie himself as a character and his actions and his behavior.
In a sense, we're kind of no better than when people first read, Goethe, right?
Yeah.
Right, Goethe. Like, people just kind of like looked at Goethe and were like, oh my god, we should all like die of suicide for love, you know? And when I think Goethe was just kind of being like, no, don't do that. This is not.
Yeah, he was criticizing himself and his own behavior as a young person. For those of who are new here, Louisa based Laurie's character arc to young Werther, which is Goethe's book from the 18th century Germany. It's a little side note.
Yeah.
And Friedrich is based on Goethe on one level, but we will get into that.
Yeah, in the other video.
Yeah.
Yes. I read Goethe in German. Yeah, it's a lovely read, but you also kind of see some of the ridiculousness of that kind of romantic vision, because like he really relates to these big storms, right?
Yeah.
These thunderstorms. It's like, it's a signifier of these emotional events, and then. But like that's that book really makes fun of that, and people at the time didn't get that, and people also don't seem to get that now.
It's very harmful when suicide is being romanticized in general. Trying to blackmail someone for romantic reasons. That's really, really harmful, and it's something that's still not recognized fully enough.
Because if we can't, like I said before, if we're criticizing that behavior in books now, in fiction that is coming out now, then why can't we change the way that we see this character? I wonder if people kind of decide how they see him because of the films.
I've been thinking about this. The films, they tend to include the same scenes. Then there are those scenes that are being dismissed. With Laurie, he's idealized and romanticized, and his flaws are downgraded, and with Amy, it is the opposite.
So, which is why so many people get angry when they get together.
Yeah.
And you're missing all of that nice context. I think really, Little Women needs a proper show, like not even just a miniseries, like maybe even like a show, because like otherwise you don't pick up on all these really great scenes that add dimension to these characters. I really liked that exploration you did based on Goethe, because I hadn't really seen that character that way before. More discussions like this need to happen.
I just love this. It's great.
Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun.
The next people who's going to adapt Little Woman, have a good listen on these talks that we are having.
I hope so. I really hope so.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Both me and Emily are definitely available to be consultants on these matters, and we know people who can help you more.
Yay.
Yeah.
Hollywood needs to hit us up. Well, so that's our discussion on Laurie and Amy, also on different films as well. And of course, we went on different tangents about different characters, of course, because all of these themes are connected. But, well, we hope you enjoyed our discussion of Laurie.
Well, thank you for listening, guys.
Thank you.